So one of our members was telling me recently about a very interesting and alarming conversation that she had with her sister, who was raised in a Christian home, but hasn't exactly been living the Christian life. But I think everyone was, kind of thinking that, deep down inside, she still believed somewhere. And the subject of Jesus came up, and she just began spouting all of this anti-Christian venom and poison, and referring to Christians as ignorant and stupid and repressive. And she then began to mock God openly and referred to him as the invisible sky fairy and all of this other stuff. And then said, if there is a God, he has to be the most hateful, sadistic, evil monster that there ever was. And our church member tried reasoning with her sister, and her sister became only more agitated before just completely losing it and storming out of the house and just leaving where they were. And these kinds of encounters are becoming more and more common. Maybe not with people like storming out, but people who are just brazenly anti-Christian and in your face about it. And they all seem to have a lot of the same talking points and the same MO, because their reaction is really very, very consistent. And again, it's more and more of a thing. In fact, the Urban Dictionary even now has a name for people like this. They're called hatetheists. And a hatetheist, and I quote the Urban Dictionary, a hateful atheist who abhors all semblances of a god or gods, which is ironic considering the fact that they hate something that they do not believe exists. Used in a sentence, again, I quote from the Urban Dictionary, Richard Dawkins is a hatetheist who makes his money slandering against something he does not believe in. Robin Schumacher, a blogger, wrote an article entitled Profile of Hatetheists, which she says is based on her experience. But in conversations I've had with several people, I think her experience are becoming pretty much mainstream. And she writes, and I'm going to quote a good bit from her blog because she just says it so much better than and I don't want to plagiarize her, so I'll give her credit. She writes, I thought and I would try and present a profile of a hatetheist versus the atheists so Christians can have an idea of when to enter into discussions and when to walk away with unbelievers. The below is based on my experience alone. Whereas the atheist is respectful during a conversation or interaction, the hatetheist either immediately or very soon descends into ad hominem attacks and disrespectful name-calling. The names used many times completely mischaracterize a Christian's true position, e.g. flat earther. Sometimes the hatetheist will go so far as to say that anyone who believes in God is clinically crazy or insane. I've heard that at least 3 or 4 times myself, that people who believe like we do are clinically insane. In addition, she writes, to attacking a Christian's intelligence or character, the hatetheist routinely tosses out derogatory names or references to God, e.g. invisible sky fairy, which I've heard multiple times as well. In fact, it's now even found its way on bumper stickers. I continue. And Jesus as a Jewish zombie or bejeebus. The atheist, however, typically does not refer to God or Jesus in such ways. Hatetheists tend to be inordinately arrogant and border on narcissism when it comes to their perception of their own intelligence versus those who hold to a theistic worldview. An example are hatetheists who label themselves as the brights, and I've seen that as well, with the obvious message being that anyone who is not an atheist must be dim-witted. The atheist genuinely considers arguments and presented evidence, whereas the hatetheist does not. The hatetheist either ignores expert testimony, uses numerous red herrings, or charges the Christian with quote smithing when various quotes from experts are used to support a theistic position. and never considers any expert testimony. Ironically, many of the same atheists who do this maintain websites rotating quotes from famous atheists or sport links to other atheist sites that contain quotable information. But the bottom line is that there is a willing unbelief in the atheists that will not entertain a position that is contrary to their own. The atheist adheres to science but understands and recognizes its limits, whereas the atheist is a devotee to scientism. The atheist tends to be universal in their critique of any God, but the atheist focuses mostly, if not solely, on Christianity. The atheist shows no fear in mocking Jesus in graphic ways, but is remarkably restrained, whereas others, such as Muhammad, are concerned. The atheist's actions are ones that are secure and that they will not lash out in irrational ways to thoughts of theism. Christianity is not threatening in that way, and they feel no need to interject themselves into a Christian's worship or their special days to interrupt them. The atheist, on the other hand, exhibits very insecure activity, such as launching billboard promotional ads during seasons where their worldview is most threatened, such as Christmas and Easter. I'm having more and more encounters with people like this. And people in our church are telling me that they're having more and more encounters with people like this. And frankly, I don't really get it. I don't understand where all of this vitriol is coming from. For example, in a recent survey of university professors, 22% of university professors confess to having a negative view towards Christianity, or not Christianity, towards Islam. In other words, 22% are haters against Islam, whereas 56% of university professors have confessed to a negative view towards Christianity, nearly 3 times the amount, which again, I don't get. I don't understand, because Christianity presents a far more compatible ethic and worldview to progressive, secular, and even liberal society. For example, Christianity is a religion that teaches an ethic of brotherly love, of hospitality, peace, freedom, forgiveness, and service to our fellow human beings. Christians were at the forefront and drove the suffrage movement. Christians were at the forefront and drove the civil rights movement. Christians have been a worldwide force for good and progress for centuries now. Just ask our Indian friends the impact that William Carey, the very first missionary and the first missionary to India, had on their country. Probably more so than any other person in the history of their country, to alleviate wrongs and social wrongs and to initiate progress in their country. Christians are responsible for more charity worldwide than any other group. We have more hospitals, distribute more food, house more orphans, adopt more children, help more people in disasters than any other group, period. Muslims, on the other hand, and I say this not to hate on Muslims or to advocate hatred towards them, especially as individuals, but because they were the group that was contrasted in the study, and to demonstrate basically the absurdity of a hatred of Christians over other religious groups or other groups, period, and in this case, Muslims. Islam, for example, involves a very rigid worldview and ethic. Homosexuality is straight up illegal in most Islamic countries, and in some it is punishable by death. Women have few rights under Sharia law in most Islamic countries, and in some they cannot even drive. Many Muslims advocate or practice polygamy. Extreme Muslims, certainly not all Muslims, but extreme Muslims are responsible for most of the terrorism in the world. Extreme Muslims are responsible for the persecution of others and even genocide. Again, I'm not advocating the hatred of Muslims, but just simply demonstrating the irrationality of thought that would cause university professors to hate on Christians at 3 times the amount of Muslims, when the Christian worldview is clearly far more compatible with the ethics and the values they claim to espouse. It doesn't make sense. Again, it's irrational. But then Jesus said this would happen. In John 15, we find some very interesting verses that in our society, especially in the last century where Christianity has really been in a position of favor, we just kind of gloss over these because we don't see it. We have not experienced these things, although in today's society, this is starting to change. But Jesus tells his disciples, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world. But I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember the words I spoke to you. No servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. They will treat you in this way because of my name. For they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not be guilty of sin. Now, however, they have no excuse for their sin. He who hates me hates my Father as well. If I had not done among them what no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have seen these miracles, and yet they have hated both me and my Father. But this is to fulfill what was written in their law. They hated me without reason. Jesus closes by saying they hated me without reason, and what he's obviously saying is they hated me without a legitimate reason. Their hatred is irrational. Their hatred doesn't make any sense, kind of like what we're describing in our society with the atheist, because he does actually go into reasons why the world hates him, and then he says, and by the way, they're going to hate you for these same reasons as well. For example, we do not belong to the world. He says, if we belong to the world, then the world would love us as its own. But we do not belong to the world, the inference being so they're not going to exactly love us. And the idea here is that we love what we value. So let's say that I'm really into Spider-Man comics and collect vintage Pez dispensers. And I meet someone else, let's randomly at a party or at a social gathering somewhere, and they likewise are like crazy about Spider-Man comics and collect vintage Pez dispensers. We're going to naturally hit it off, right? We're going to be in a corner talking about all this goofy stuff that no one else even cares about, but at the end of the night, I'm going to go, man, I really like that person. That person's, super cool because we love what we value. We like what we value. We resonate towards what we value and shared values because we get it. We work at the same wavelength. And although Christianity expresses so much of what our world claims to value, and so much of the ethic our world claims to value, such as love, peace, freedom, grace, the brotherhood of man, service to our fellow man, etc., we really do have some very fundamental differences. And I'm using the word world in the context of how we defined it the last two messages. And that is, the world is that collective entity of fallen humanity and society and culture. Not necessarily the people, but the system, that world mindset, of which, of course, people are involved with, and people are tools, and people express those values of the world, but the world and the concept of the world is much bigger than that. And if we could sum up that worldview that the world has, or that philosophy of the world, or the approach of the world, I think the best word is the word humanism. And secular humanism basically dismisses God out of hand and says that the universe revolves around mankind and our needs. Whereas Christianity says that the universe revolves around God and his kingdom. And so if you genuinely believe, if you honestly, sincerely believe that you represent the highest good, and seeking your needs and what's best for you is the highest good, and someone comes along and says, oh no, it's not about you. it's about God and his kingdom, then people are going to react against that. Maybe some will listen, and maybe some will even become Christians, but many others are going to react against that, and they're going to react against the implications of your worldview and what it is that you are saying and what it is that you have to say. Humanism believes in personal pride and the exaltation of self, while Christianity believes and embraces humility and the denial of self. Humanism believes that we should make the rules and the laws that seem good to us at the time because morality is arbitrary. Christianity says that morality is fixed in the person and the character of God, and that our laws and our rules socially and otherwise should reflect that. Humanism embraces temporal realities and values your best life now, while Christianity embraces eternal realities and values that there is life in God now and forevermore. And these are all big picture distinctions that trickle down into our worldview and how we view reality and how we live life. And you don't have to spend that much time with someone, just talking with someone, before you realize that their worldview and their values are very different from yours. And I'm not talking about minor differences. You know, like, hey, I'm a Georgia guy and you're an Alabama guy, or right Twix, left Twix. I mean, that's no big deal. I mean, we get that. We know how to handle that. But we're not as well equipped to deal with defining and fundamental differences. Like the difference between a Christian worldview and a humanist worldview. Very, very different. And someone who is a straight up humanist, secular humanist, you know, they're not really sure what to do necessarily with Christians, especially if they haven't had a lot of contact with Christians. Maybe sometimes specifically because they have. Because, you know, they're sitting there and they're like, man, you know, I'm not really exactly sure where this Christian is coming from. I wonder what they're thinking. I wonder what they're going to say. I wonder what they're going to do. I wonder if they're going to judge me. I wonder if they're going to try and convert me. Do I need to be careful here? Is there something that's going to be threatening to me personally here? Is there something dangerous here? I'm not really comfortable with this relationship because I can't exactly define what's going on. I don't love it. Whereas when they meet someone who shares their values and shares their worldview, they're like, okay, I know what to do with that. I can navigate that. I'm far more comfortable. I'm going to love you as my own. That's what Jesus is saying. If you were of the world and you thought like the world and you approach things in the way that the world does, then they're going to love you. They're going to embrace you because it's all good. But because your worldview is fundamentally different than theirs, they're not going to know what to do with you, and it's going to create a natural tension. Second reason Jesus says that the world is going to struggle with us and at times even hate us is because of our association with Jesus. And Jesus represents God, and they don't know God. That's the language that Jesus used. He says in the text, no servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. The very presence of Jesus is a threat to some people. Not everybody, but to some people, certain people. Remember when Jesus was on this earth, he helped people, he healed people, he taught the kingdom of God, he lived and preached an ethic of love and peace and grace and forgiveness and mercy. He never hurt anybody, he never really threatened anybody overtly, although people were threatened, but it wasn't because he was, threatening to hurt someone. And all he ever intended for us was good, and so many people hated him. And they persecuted him, and ultimately they crucified him. Why? Because he represented something bigger than themselves. because they didn't want anyone, including God, telling them what to do. And the temptation for us is, well, Jesus was just misunderstood. If they really knew what Jesus was about and what he was trying to accomplish, then, they would have treated him differently. I mean, nobody is going to be, that evil. And the truth is, they didn't misunderstand. They knew exactly who and what he was about. They just didn't want to hear it. Likewise, the temptation for us when we have these kinds of encounters with people who are hostile towards us because of our faith is to say, oh, we're just misunderstood. And it's hard for us to be in that position because in our minds, in the way that we think, man, we're about what's good. We're about what's right, what's true, what's healthy, and we're just trying to help people. So how could they possibly hate on us? They must just not get it. They must not understand. And the truth is, they understand just fine. Many of them could even state the gospel back to you. I've had that happen to me, even as they mock it. And the truth is, they don't want to be challenged with the accountability and the responsibility of something in the universe that has more authority than they do. They don't want to be challenged with the implications of the fact that God exists and the implications that he might possibly have authority over their lives, and so they shoot the messenger. Isaiah describes this exact posture, this exact attitude in Isaiah 30. And I didn't put it up on the screen. Just listen to what Isaiah says. He says, this is Isaiah 30, verses 9 through 11, if you're taking notes. These are rebellious people, deceitful children unwilling to listen to the Lord's instruction. They say to the seers, see no more visions, and to the prophets, give us no more visions of what is right. Tell us pleasant things, prophesy illusions, leave this way, get off this path. And then the final line is, and stop confronting us with the Holy One of Israel. That's exactly what we see in the hate theists. The very idea of God sets them off. And Jesus says in John 15, it's because they don't know God. They may know of God, they may know things about God, but they don't know God. Like experientially, they don't know him. They don't know or nor have experienced the love and the peace and the grace and the freedom and the forgiveness and everything that we've experienced. That's foreign to them. They don't know him, which is interesting because they were in an extremely religious culture. And all of them in that culture that Jesus is speaking to was brought up in a very religious way. And many of the people that he's directly referring to in this passage in John 15 are even leaders. They're Pharisees. They're priests. And so if they don't know God, it's because they choose not to know God. They are being willfully disobedient. And that is why, because they are willfully disobedient, this is why they hated on Christ. This is why they persecuted Christ. This is why they crucified Christ. And this is why they will hate on us and persecute us as well in the ways that they feel like they can get away with. Because of our association with Christ, we now represent very uncomfortable realities for them. Third reason Jesus says that people hate on us, and again, it's not everybody hates on us. But some people do, and that number seems to be growing today. But the third reason why people hate on us is because we convict them of sin. I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong. But it seems to me that the people who have a problem with Christ seem to be the very same people who are not living right. And the more they're not living right, it seems the bigger the problem they have with Christ. Have you ever spoken with someone who is living like a morally alternative lifestyle, a morally, progressive lifestyle, and who just hates on Christians and Christianity. Maybe they're not in your face about it, but you know their thoughts, you know their feelings. They're the ones out there who think all of these terrible things about God, and that Christians are hateful and repressive, and God is the invisible sky fairy, and all of that kind of stuff. And notice that if you ever ask them, well, hey, can you tell me of a specific time where a Christian or a group of Christians treated you badly because you have tattoos and piercings, or because you don't have any problem with sleeping around and doing that, or maybe because you party, or maybe you're gay, or whatever it happens to be. Can you give me a specific instance of a specific Christian who behaved very, very badly towards you and just hated on you because of these things? And they'll all say, oh yes, I've had that happen, quite a bit. And the conversation has this tendency to go like this. Well, tell me what they said. Oh, well, they really didn't say anything. It was really more of how they behaved. Okay, well, tell me what they did. Well, I guess they really didn't do anything. It was really more of a vibe that they were giving off. Well, describe this vibe for me. Well, it's really hard to describe, but I know what they were thinking. Well, what were they thinking? Oh, Christians are just a bunch of hateful, racist, homophobic fascists. No, I'm not talking about that. Give me a specific instance where a specific Christian treated you in a way that expressed direct hostility and rejection of you as an individual. And often they can't do it. If they do, they cite 1, 2 instances out of all of the encounters with Christians they've had, over their entire life. And think about that. Like, how many Christians do you come in contact with on a daily basis? That you rub shoulders with in your neighborhood, at your workplace, at your school, in your kids' sports leagues, whatever it happens to be. How many Christians do you encounter on a daily basis? Or how about on a weekly basis? Or a monthly basis? Or on a yearly basis? And how many Christians would you say that you have encountered and you have had dealings with in one way or another over the entire course of your life? It's got to be a lot. Like a lot. Thousands, probably tens of thousands. And you're going to judge this entire group of millions of people because of 1 or 2 encounters where maybe they didn't even say or do anything, but you knew what they were thinking. What if I just showed up in some social circle here in society where there's a good mix of people and everybody's just talking, and all of a sudden I just throw out, you know what, man? I hate gay people. I met this one person who was just over the top crazy, offensive in every possible way, and he happened to be gay, so I'm just going to hate all gay people from now on. Or I met this person with tattoos and piercings, and this person, treated me in a way that just made me feel so small and so terrible, so I'm just going to hate on all people with tattoos and piercings, although they didn't necessarily say or do anything, but I knew what they were thinking. You'd say, and everybody there would say, well, that's not right. You can't do that. You can't treat people that way. That's not fair. That's being hateful. That's being judgmental. Yes, it is. The vast, overwhelming majority of Christians are good, decent, loving, accepting people who would no more who have no desire to condemn someone for not adhering to a set of values that they don't believe in. The vast majority of Christians that I know personally are caring, generous people, kind people, who are far more likely to express grace than condemnation. So where is all of this hate coming from? So where do the atheists get all of this vitriol that they spew back out into society, and especially back towards Christians? Because I can guarantee you that in the vast overwhelming majority of cases that there is not an individual Christian or Christians expressing the same level of hostility towards them as an individual. And they'll say, well, I just know Christians. I know how they are. I know what they're thinking. I know what's going on in their heads. I know how judgmental they are. I know what their opinions are of me and what I do and all that. And you know what? No, you don't. You have absolutely no idea what Christians are thinking. It's all in your head. It's in your mind. And it's stuff that you picked up from other atheists who tell you what Christians are thinking, but that's not necessarily what Christians are thinking. And you project these thoughts and you project these feelings onto Christians because you feel shame and guilt in their presence. They don't have to say or do anything. Frankly, the shame and the guilt is from yourself because you feel convicted in their presence because of who and what they represent. Again, they don't have to say, they don't have to do anything. There is a conviction that naturally occurs when people are around Christians in that way. And so when you break it down like what we've done and like what Jesus does, it doesn't make any sense. It's irrational. That's why, 56% of university professors can hate on Christianity, which is far more compatible with their values and with progressive thought than, Muslims at 1/3 the rate who represent almost the antithesis of everything they value as progressive thought. It doesn't make any sense. That's why there's the irrational overreaction. It's not logical. It's spiritual. And Jesus lays it out pretty well how all of that breaks down. And so the question, kind of becomes at this point is, why bring all of this up? And I didn't bring it up. Jesus did. And in 2 verses later, he tells us why. Starting in John 16, 1-4. He writes, "All this I have told you so that you will not go astray. They will put you out of the synagogue. In fact, a time is coming when anyone who kills you will think he is offering a service to God. And they will do such things because they have not known the Father or me. I have told you this so that when the time comes, you will remember that I warned you. I did not tell you this at first because I was with you." And so he's telling us these things to warn us. He's telling us these things so that if and when it happens, we're not caught off guard. We're not surprised. It doesn't blow our minds or rock our worlds or destroy our faith. We're not like, oh man, people are just hating on me out there. I don't know what to do with that. Where's God? Woe is me. That whole train of thinking, that we get into when things are not going well. And I quote Jesus directly, "Remember that I told you," or "Remember that I warned you." So that if and when you experience this attitude, and I think we're at the point in our society now, it's to the point of when, not if. The atheists are growing like weeds. This is well documented, maybe even exponentially at this point. They're becoming well organized, which is why they all seem to have the same talking points, which is why you hear a lot of the same rhetoric over and over and over again, much of it coming from Richard Dawkins and those who follow him and all of that kind of stuff. Remember that I warned you. And so, when it happens, we are ready to respond with spiritual integrity, to respond with love, to respond with grace, to respond with peace, to respond with mercy. And we talked about this last week and how to respond to the world and turning the other cheek and loving your enemies and all that kind of stuff. This is the sort of thing that is the exact context of most of those verses. And here's the thing that's really tough for us is that Jesus loves the atheists. He really does. And he died for them. And he wants them to know him. And he wants them to love him too. And here's the thing. In our strength and how we respond, it's never going to happen. It's just not. But as we respond in the Spirit, as we respond in the strength of Christ and the courage of Christ and the faithfulness of Christ, God uses that in mighty ways. You know, the times when the church grows the fastest is in times of persecution. But not just any time of persecution, when Christians respond with spiritual integrity. And so my challenge is, and we're going to talk really this whole series, Faith in a Fallen World, is going to be talking more and more about our response and how we deal with that and the perspective with which we view these things. And today was really kind of to define scripturally about why these things happen to us so that we understand. So that we get it and so we can respond, well. But we are going to be talking about this a lot more. But for today, understand that even though we represent what is good and right and true and healthy and we want to help people, not everyone's going to get that. And a lot of people are going to react. And when we react in a healthy and a positive way, for whatever reason, however it's just one of those things that God can do, that we can't do. But the kingdom goes forward in amazing ways. And there's a saying, the church is built on the blood of the martyrs. And I'm not saying that we're getting to that point in our society, but we're going to have to learn how to function in a society where we do not have the favor that we once had. And we need to learn from Jesus and what he's saying. Remember that I warned you, so that you can respond well and respond even as I responded in laying down my life for the very ones who crucified me.